Oh, the villains! Welcome back, Book Dragons. Today we are going to be talking about my top 10 villains in fiction. Before we get to it, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, join my Discord, all that fun stuff. And I would just love to have you be a more active part of my community if you aren't already. And if you are, thank you so much for that. Without any further ado, let's get right to this list. And I'm going to start off with one honorable mention. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because it is not so much a character as it is an overarching theme or philosophy or belief system that surrounds this particular series. And that is from the Dark Tower series by Stephen King, and that is Ka. So for this honorable mention, I am saying that Ka is the overarching enemy of the Dark Tower series. And that's unpopular, and it's totally strange because Ka is an idea. It is representative of fate or destiny or things of that nature. And there are actual villains in the Dark Tower series. But all of those villains are manipulated and controlled by the hand of fate. So really, when it comes right down to it, fate is the main antagonist in the Dark Tower series. Fate is the reason that Roland cannot break the never-ending cycle of the Dark Tower. Fate is the reason that he can't save the people he loves. Fate is the reason that this world has gone to shit. And Roland constantly talks about if Ka wills it, if Ka determines that it should be so. Ka is a wheel and is constantly turning, and things of that nature that you've heard similar things before. Ultimately, we are just all pawns in the hand of Ka or in the hand of fate, if this is true. So that's why I'm making it an honorable mention, because it's not an actual person. It's more of an idea or a force that controls everything. So anyway, I'm off my soapbox now. Let's get to my top 10 villains. And we are going to start by putting on my eyes. And I'm going to start with number 10. And number 10 is a new villain for me. I recently read The Way of Edan by Philip Chase, and I'm currently reading The Prophet of Edan. One of my favorite villains is actually the Supreme Priest Bledla from the Edan series by Philip Chase. He is just a fantastically written character, so menacing, so terrifying in so many respects, and yet so relatable, because he actually really believes that what he's doing is the will of his God, the will of Edan, and he is doing everything in his power to bring about the kingdom of Edan. He showcases what happens when people follow a belief system so blindly. So it's really, really well done, and I'm really hooked on him. I'm looking forward to seeing where his character goes. Before I get to number 9, I do want to say that there are going to be some spoilers in this video. So in the timestamps below, there will be timestamps for each of these characters that I'm going to talk about. I will just cite the book or series that they come from. That way, if you have not read that book or series and you don't want spoilers, you won't have to worry about being spoiled. You can just skip right ahead, okay? But I wanted to say that earlier in the video and I didn't, so I'm sorry about that. So we're going to move right on to number 9, and that character comes from the first Law Trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. And this particular character may not be considered a villain by everyone. So this may be an unpopular opinion, but that would be the wizard Baaz. At the very end of the series, it becomes very clear that he has been manipulating everything behind the scenes to work his will in the kingdom. He's kind of a villain type character. Not necessarily a full villain, but it's very evident that he's in control and he's going to do whatever it takes to get his way. And I think he's a fantastic villain. Baaz is my second favorite character in the first Law Trilogy, second only to Sandanglokta. I just think he's a fascinating character. So let's move on to number 8. And that villain comes from the Harry Potter series by J.K. Rowling. And you can probably guess who it is, but if you have not read the Harry Potter series, go ahead and skip ahead now. And that would be Lord Voldemort, the main big bad in the Harry Potter series. He is just a fascinating villain. So ominous, and people hesitate to speak his name, and that the power that he wields is just awesome to behold. The direct threat that he poses to Harry throughout the series is just really engaging. So I love Voldemort. He's a favorite of mine, hands down. Let's move on to number 7. And this character comes from The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. You probably know who I'm going to talk about, but if you have not read The Hobbit, you need to skip away now, because I'm going to be talking about everyone's favorite dragon, Smaug. He's one of my favorite dragons. But more importantly, he's one of my favorite villains in fiction. I just can't get enough of Smaug. I really can't. I mean, even in the movies, I did not care for the Hobbit movies, but I tell you what, Benedict Cumberbatch nailed Smaug. I mean, Smaug was perfect in at least the second movie, and you know, he kind of went out in the third movie, but you know, it's just such a great character, and the way he toys with Bilbo in the book, and the way they bounce riddles off of each other, and the threat that he poses to Bilbo and the nations of Middle-earth in that book is just frightening, but he's so awe-inspiring as well, and I'm just like, oh, I love Smaug. He's great. So yeah, he is my number 7. My number 6 is also from Tolkien, but this character comes from The Lord of the Rings. And it may not be who you think. If you read Lord of the Rings, it may not be who you think. If you have not read Lord of the Rings, I don't know where you've been, but if you haven't, step away now. Otherwise, we are going to be talking about Saruman. I think that Saruman is a much more compelling character than Sauron. And that's an unpopular opinion. I get it. Like, Sauron is the big bad of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But I think Saruman is so much more fascinating. I think he is so much more well developed. I know that Sauron gets more developed in more of the histories of Middle-earth and stuff like that, and in the Silmarillion. I get it, I do, but just as far as the story of the Lord of the Rings, I think Saruman is just the most compelling villain, partly because the roots that he came from, being part of the Wizard's Council, then being corrupted by Sauron, being corrupted by the voice from Mordor, and it's just a fascinating tale. And he goes on to create some of the most menacing crossbreeds of orcs, and you know, with the Uruk-hai and things like that. So it's just so good. I absolutely love Saruman the White. Coming in at number 5, we have a character from the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. So if you haven't read the Dresden Files, or if you haven't read to a certain point in the Dresden Files, like at least halfway through the series, you want to step away now. Otherwise, this character's name, at the very least, is going to be spoiled for you. Okay? Are you ready? Nicodemus Arcleon is just a fascinating. He is a human who has been corrupted by one of the pieces of silver that Christ was betrayed with. And so it has a demon attached to it, and he is being controlled by this demon. And he is a very tough match for Harry at various different points in the series. And he's just really, really well written, really well fleshed out. He's not one of these cookie cutter villains. He's got layers, man. He's like an onion, right? He's got those layers, and the deeper you go, the more your eyes water. He's just a really well done character, and one of the best villains that I've read in fiction. So there you go, Nicodemus Arcleon. We're moving on to number 4, and this character comes from Dune by Frank Herbert. You're probably familiar with who I'm going to talk about, but here we go. This would be Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, the ruler of the Harkonnen Syndicate on Arrakis, and a true villain in every sense of the word. Not only is his presence felt throughout the entire book, his personality and his deep-seated dark nature just permeate the entire book. He's one of those characters that isn't seen a whole lot of times throughout the book, but his influence and power and hatred for the Atreides family especially is deeply felt in every page. Vladimir Harkonnen, he gives me chills. Number 3 is taken from 2 books, and I'm doing 2 on this one because they are very similar books. In fact, one book inspired the other, and that would be Dracula by Bram Stoker and Salem's Lot by Stephen King. So if you have not read these books, you need to step away. Move to the next one, okay? Are you ready? Here we go. So of course, from Bram Stoker's Dracula, the obvious villain, and my favorite villain, one of my favorite villains in all of fiction, is Count Dracula. Just a fascinating character. I just love the way that he has so many facets to his character. He can shift to a wolf, he can shift to a bat, he can shift to a human, he can take on these really complex glamours to seduce people to think that he means well, and he has this mesmerizing magnetism about him that just draws people in. And once they've been drawn in, they're his prey, and he can do whatever he wants with them. And it's such a great villain. Such a great villain. And the reason I paired this with Salem's Lot by Stephen King is because Salem's Lot was inspired by Bram Stoker's Dracula, and in fact, Kurt Barlow in Salem's Lot, if you haven't read it, remember, you gotta step away. Kurt Barlow is essentially Dracula from modern age, and Kurt Barlow is a very, very well-written villain. He's also very ominous because for much of the book, he doesn't really show up a whole lot. But again, it's one of those things where his presence is felt throughout the whole book. People know about this mysterious character that lives in a house on the hill that only has one light on at night, and it's otherwise appears vacant during the day. And it's that tension, it's that dramatic tension that just builds up every time his character is felt. And so, such a well-written character, and the fact that he was inspired by Bram Stoker's Dracula just is another kudos to Stephen King, in my opinion. And I'm hit or miss with Stephen King, but Salem's Lot is my favorite Stephen King book of all time, at least so far. So, and I don't think that'll change, because I've read some other King books and I'm like, oh, yeah, I don't know. Salem's Lot is still it for me. But we're moving on to number 2. And that would be From A Song of Ice and Fire by George R. R. Martin. So if you've not read these books, you have not watched the show, you need to step away. I'm giving you your chance right now. The Others are one of the most compelling villains in all of fiction. And, of course, they're called the White Walkers in the TV show. For some reason, they thought it might be more menacing, which I guess it is. It is kind of more a more menacing name. But they are these, not necessarily undead. They can create undead. They can create wights and zombies and stuff like that. But they're not necessarily undead. They're creatures of the frozen wastelands of all of time in Westeros. They've been around for at least thousands of years. They're this creeping enemy behind the scenes. They are not as much in the forefront in the books as they are in the TV show. I'll just let you know that. But it's another one of those subtle enemies that is just, they're talked about. You know, people use it in curses. The others take you, because people get taken by the White Walkers and killed, and they form these weird circles with body parts from their victims. It's creepy, guys. It is so creepy, but it is so creepy cool. And I just absolutely love them. They are my second favorite villain, enemy, what have you, in all of fiction. So, you are probably wondering now who my favorite villain is of all time. And this, I will admit, is kind of a cheat. We know him from movies, but he's in books too. There have been books written about him, so I haven't read books with this villain. But my favorite villain of all time has always been, and probably will always be, Darth Vader from the Star Wars universe. I know, I'm cheating a little bit here, but because he shows up in books, I feel justified. And if you don't think I'm justified, just be nice and let me go my way. And Darth Vader is one of the best villains ever written for fiction, in movies and in books. In my personal opinion, Darth Vader is a pop culture icon. Most people know who he is, so I won't say too much about him, but wow, what a fascinating character. Yeah, I didn't so much like his backstory in the prequel trilogy, but it was still fascinating to learn about him, to see where he came from, to see his turn to the dark side, and to see what a powerful figure he became as it worked into the original trilogy and things like that. So yeah, Darth Vader, hands down, my top favorite villain. What are some of your favorite villains? I would love to know. Please leave them down in the comments, or if you want to hit me up on Discord, talk about this video. We can talk about all of your favorite villains. I would love to find out. Until next time, guys, make sure you read more books. I'll talk with you soon.